Good evening, everybody. Thank you for listening to J Hill the Sports Dude. Thank you for listening to the my Boston sports podcast. And hold on, let's shut this off. All right, then we're 4 games into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and obviously we had some pretty mixed results so far in the Stanley Cup. But we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about the Boston Red Sox for a little bit, and then we'll talk about the NBA Finals, and then we'll go from there. We got some stuff to talk about, so plenty of stuff to talk about. But first, let's talk about the most important matter. So, the Stanley Cup. So, obviously, the big topic in Boston sports. So, let's start with Game 1. So, Game 1, the Boston Bruins won 4-2. And it started off, the Bruins didn't start off that great. They looked pretty sloppy. They didn't look as cohesive. They weren't cohesive offensively. And a lot of that had to do with St. Louis's defense, who was doing pretty well against the Bruins. And the Bruins allowed the first goal in the game. St. Louis got the first goal in the first period. But the Bruins were able to keep the game 1-0 in the first period. And then in the second period, they allowed the second goal, and so they were down 2-0. And at this point, it was a little frustrating to watch as they couldn't get anything offensively. And they also got some power play opportunities, but unfortunately, they weren't able to score on any of the power play opportunities that they had. And I mean, like I said before, you got to give the Blues credit. However, a minute after the Blues scored the goal to go up 2-0, Connor Clifton was able to break the ice, no pun intended, after a Connor Clifton goal with a goal that was able to bounce into the net. And so that seemed to spark the Bruins' offense. And then they finally got a goal on the power play after they were able to tie the game on a power play with Charlie McAvoy. And at first it didn't look like the power play was going to go out very well. They weren't getting any good shots. The Blues were playing them tight, and but essentially Charlie McAvoy scored a goal that wasn't exactly your traditional power play goal. He scored just a straight goal on net and was able to get it past Jordan Binnington. And then basically after that, the Bruins essentially outplayed the Blues for basically the rest of the game. Like, they outshot them. They were able to get a possession that turned the puck over to their and get plenty of possessions. And then eventually the Blues cracked, and Sean Kuraly scored a game winner, and Brad Marchand got a empty netter to essentially seal the game. So, as far as statistics for the game, the Bruins had 38 shots. The St. Louis Blues were held to 20 shots. So, the Bruin defense really played their part. Hits, 32 Bruins, 33 Blues. Penalty and then power plays, Bruins had 5 opportunities, and the Blues had 2. So pretty dominant, as you can see from the stats, pretty dominant play by the Bruins, especially after they scored that first goal by Connor Clifton. So Sean Kuraly had a goal and assist. Marcus Johansson also played really well, and Connor Clifton had the goal that essentially lifted the Bruins, and after that they played much better. So very good, solid victory for the Boston Bruins. And then we move on to Game 2, and Game 2 was a little different. So the Bruins, actually, when they started, they seemed to be playing better than the Blues. They were able to get the first goal off of a goal by Charlie Coyle, who's been pretty good in these playoffs, off a power play. And then the Blues scored after that. And the next thing, Joakim Nordstrom scores, so the Bruins are up 2-1. And then next thing you know, Tarasenko scores, and then the game is tied. And then basically after that, in the second and third period, there were no goals scored. And so it was kind of back and forth. Both teams kind of had stretches. I would say the Blues probably had more stretches in which they could have scored to win the game, but it was pretty back and forth. And then we went to overtime, and unfortunately in overtime, the Bruins looked completely gassed and basically didn't touch the puck once, and then the Bruins got a penalty on them, and so the Blues had 6 players on the ice, and then they were able to get a goal to win the game in overtime. From some guy named Connor Gunnarsson, who I'm not really familiar with, and to add insult to injury, speaking of injury, in the game, Matt Grzelcyk got hit and was out for the game, and so you lost Matt Grzelcyk, so you only had 5 defensemen in the game, and so that definitely played a problem. That played a part in. It kind of seemed like the Bruins were pretty gassed after near the end of the game, especially in overtime. So statistically, the Blues definitely had an advantage in this game. Shots, Blues had 37, Bruins had 23 hits. Blues had 50 hits, and the Bruins had 31. And I think the hits might have taken a toll on the Bruins, especially when it came to their energy, especially in overtime. And the Bruins were also 1 for 5 on the power play. So you would have for a power play this good, you would like to see them do a lot better than when you get like 5 opportunities. Especially that's because strength-wise, the Bruins have an advantage on special teams against the Blues, and also giveaways. The Blues had 17 and the Bruins had 9. So the Blues definitely outplayed the Bruins in the game, but the Bruins were in there at the end. They just, I don't know, it just seemed like they couldn't. It just seemed like the Blues were desperate and they just played with more energy, and so unfortunately the Bruins couldn't cap off in overtime. And unfortunately Matt Grzelcyk was put in concussion protocol and was announced he was not going to play for Game 3. So Connor Gunnarsson had a goal and assist, Tarasenko had a goal, and Joakim Nordstrom also had a goal and was a pretty big part of the defense and why the Bruins were able to stay in the game. And also another stat that was pretty telling, Bruins had 19 block shots and the Blues had 13. So that shows you the amount of pressure that the Blues were providing. So going into St. Louis, you knew that the Bruins had been a great road team, but you knew that they had to play really well on the road because you had to get back home ice. And one thing that was pretty troublesome in the first 2 games was the fact that the Bruins' top line, which you would think would give the Bruins an advantage over the Blues, just had not been playing well. Like they weren't making any impact. Brad Marchand did some okay things in Game 1, but in Game 2 he made some pretty bad mistakes. I think one of the turnovers led to a goal, and David Pastrnak and Patrice Bergeron really weren't doing anything offensively. I mean, Patrice Bergeron usually contributes on the defensive part of the ice, but like offensively he just wasn't contributing, so that was really worrisome. So going into St. Louis, I was pretty worried because Matt Grzelcyk was hurt and the top line wasn't doing anything. And so going into Game 3, I was pretty worried. And then coming out of Game 3, Game 3 was interesting. So St. Louis actually started off pretty strong. They were getting good shots, and they were able to get a power play opportunity. But Rask was able to make some stops, and Bruins were able to come in. And then the Bruins completely destroyed the St. Louis Blues. They scored a goal, and then they scored another goal, and then they scored another goal. So next thing you know, they were up 3-0 in the first period. And then the Bruins scored another goal, and then they were up 4-0 in the second period. And then next thing you know, the Bruins are up 4-0, and you're thinking that this is probably over. However, the Blues were able to get a goal in the second period as well, but then that was completely outdone with a Torrey Krug power play goal. And then on the power play in the third period, the Blues did score a goal, but it was too late. And then Noah Acciari hit a empty net goal, and Marcus Johansson hit a power play goal. So this was pretty surprising. Like, I was happy of the dominant effort, but I did not see like this much of a domination by the Boston Bruins. And this was mainly because of the power play. The Bruins were 4 for 4 on the power play. 4 for 4. And, I mean, the shots, Bruins had 24 shots, Blues had 29 shots, hits, Blues had 35 hits, Bruins had 29 hits, and, I mean, the stat that really tells it all is that the Bruins were 4 for 4 on the power play. Chris Bergeron showed up. He had a goal and assist, and 2 assists. David Pastrnak showed up with a goal, and Torrey Krug had 4 points off the power play. He had a goal. He had 3 assists. So just a complete domination by the Boston Bruins. And once the 5th goal game went in, Jordan Binnington was pulled. So, and then they put in what's it? I forget the goalie for Justin. I think it's Justin Williams. I forget the goalie's name for the backup goalie for the Blues. But honestly, at that point the game was over. So even though the Blues were terrible, you would expect that they would bounce back in Game 4 and really put in a much better effort to even up the series. And that's what the Blues did in Game 4. So we move on to Game 4. So Game 4 started kind of like Game 3 did, but instead of not being able to score, the Blues just scored automatically. So they scored in the first 43 seconds. Ryan O'Reilly, who basically didn't do anything so far in the Stanley Cup, scored the first goal within 43 seconds. So you could already tell that the Blues, this wasn't the same Blues from Game 3. Also, the backup goalie, his name is Jake Allen. I think I was thinking about somebody else. But Jake Allen was the backup goalie. And he was just kind of put in just so Jordan Binnington, so he could have a rest, because his night was done. And then Charlie Coyle was able to score a goal. But then Tarasenko scored a goal, and so they were up 2-1. And so the Bruins were pretty badly outplayed in the first period, but they were only down 1. And in the second period, it was pretty back and forth. But then the Blues really started to kick into gear, and it looked like they were playing much better. And then they had a power play opportunity. And then, however, the special teams has really picked up for the Bruins. And I gotta say, I believe the coach of the Blues, I remember he mentioned in the press conference that that they should lower down on the penalties. Well, first of all, the Blues had more power play opportunities than the Bruins in Game 3, and they only hit 1 goal on the power play. But apparently that worked, because apparently even though even though the Bruins, they didn't really play, I don't think they played enough. They didn't really have any power play opportunities, and they didn't deserve to have many power play opportunities, but kind of seemed like he kind of got in the officials' heads. And so Brandon Carlo was able to hit a shorthanded goal off a turnover on the Blues power play, so that you would hope that would kick the Bruins into gear, tying the game. But in the third period, the Blues completely outplayed the Bruins, and then it seemed like the Blues were just completely outplaying the Bruins and got more energy than the Bruins. And then eventually, off of a rebound off Tuukka Rask, Ryan O'Reilly scored the game-winning goal. And then Brendan Shen was able to, was able to seal the game with a empty net goal. and it was pretty depressing to watch as the Bruins could not get any offensive possession even at the end to maybe get a chance to tie the game. So that was pretty depressing. So shots, Blues had 38 shots, Bruins had 23 shots. Hits, Blues had 44 shots, Bruins had 41 shots. Block shots, Bruins had 15 and the Blues had 7. And takeaways, the Bruins had 9 and the Blues had 15. So Ryan O'Reilly played really well, had 2 goals. Alex Petrangelo had 2 assists, and Zach Sanford had 1 assist. So pretty big win for the Blues. And also, speaking of injuries, during this game, Zdeno Chara got a puck to the face, and so his face got bloody, and so in the second period he had to go to the locker room. And so he came out in the third period with the mask on, but then you realize that he was just kind of there for emotional support. So not only is Matt Grzelcyk injured, but Zdeno Chara, and it's been reported that he has a broken jaw. So 2 games in which they lose, in which a defenseman is taken out. So that's just great. So yeah, I don't really know what to take away from the Stanley Cup final so far. All right, so here's some things that do come to mind. The Bruins, usually if they get outshot and they get out hustled, then they're probably going to lose. So they usually I think, and also the Bruins do have a special teams advantage. Like the power play for the Blues has not been very good, but their penalty kill's been, except for Game 3, pretty decent. And apparently, if a Bruins defenseman gets hurt and can't play for the game, apparently they're just not going to play as well, and they're going to lose. And going into the series, you thought the Bruins had an advantage at forward with the top line of the Bruins and the depth they had. Well, apparently that's not the case, because so far the top line has been outplayed by the Blues top line. So except for Game 3, the top line hasn't really showed up that much. Tuukka Rask has been okay. And honestly, I will say this. I have a feeling that in this series, Tuukka Rask is probably going to have to steal a game. Because I believe in against the Blue Jackets, Game 6, Tuukka Rask stole that game. Game 3 against the Hurricanes, Tuukka Rask stole that game. So I have a feeling that Tuukka Rask is going to have to steal a game in which the Blues are playing at their best and the Bruins are not playing as well as them, and Tuukka Rask is going to have to steal a game for the Bruins. So that's kind of a gut feeling that I have. So as far as what they're going to do, and also the Blues defense has been much better. Like I said before, the Blues defense has been much better than the Bruins defense. And one thing that kind of disturbed me about Game 4 is that, well, you would think that the Bruins would have a speed advantage, but it just kind of seemed like the Blues had the speed advantage because they were getting to the pucks quicker than the Bruins were, and they were able to maintain possessions longer than the Bruins could. So that might have something to do with the fact that they were hit a lot and the fact that Zdeno Chara was out. So one thing I think the Bruins really need to do is to take advantage with their speed and their skill for Game 5. And one, they need to get more shots, obviously, because it seems like when they're outshot, I don't know, it just really seems like they're not playing as well. And as far as the defensemen, Matt Grzelcyk and Zdeno Chara, their status for Game 5 is unknown. I don't think Chara is going to play Game 5. I do think there's a chance that Matt Grzelcyk is going to play. I read that in practice he was on the ice, so I think there's a good chance Matt Grzelcyk plays. If none of them could play, I think there's a good shot. Bruce Cassidy mentioned that they might play 7 defensemen. So we'll see how that goes. And as far as and obviously for Game 5, the top line needs to step up, because if they're neutralized, then their offense isn't as efficient. And so, like Game 5, they need to show up. And also, I'm gonna mention 3 guys who has not contributed anything offensively: David Krejci, Jake DeBrusk, and David Backes. I mean, they have been pretty awful offensively in this series. So I really hope that they can step up too. Sean Corrali has played pretty well, and Brandon Carlo has played pretty well, and so they have been playing pretty well on offense. But I expect the top line to show up. I hope that David Krejci and Jake DeBrusk can contribute offensively. And I think I heard Bruce Cassidy might change the lines, because those guys have not contributed offensively at all. So obviously Game 5 is a must-win. I have a gut feeling that whoever wins this game might win the Stanley Cup, even though the Bruins have been a pretty good road team, and so have the Blues. In fact, I think the Blues honestly are better on the road than they are at home. I don't think they're a particularly great home team, but they're a pretty good at road team. So obviously the Bruins have to bounce back from their performance in Game 4, but I think they will bounce back, and I do expect them to bounce back and potentially win Game 5. But the Blues team are a very good road team, and I think it seems like they've kind of figured out a formula to combat the Bruins on the defensive side. And so hopefully the Bruins can put a game plan together and find a way to combat what the Blues are throwing at the Bruins. So, well, it's down to a series of 3, and whoever wins this game is one game closer to winning the Stanley Cup. And hopefully Game 5 goes to the Bruins, because I mean, I guess they could win Game 6, but I wouldn't. I'd be a little worried about the Bruins winning Game 6 and 7. They could do it, but I think Game 5, the Bruins need to find a way to combat what the Blues threw at them in Game 4. So it's kind of hard to take away anything from the series so far. It's just kind of been who's played better the night wins. That's about it. All right then. Why don't we take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the Red Sox, and then we'll go into the NBA Finals, which is also tied. All right then. Welcome back. All right, let's discuss the Boston Red Sox. So actually, before we discuss the Red Sox, I just wanted to talk about a member of the Red Sox family who recently died. So on the 27th, so last Monday, it was announced that Bill Buckner, who played for the Red Sox for 3 years, died of Lewy body dementia. So he passed away at the age of 69. And so obviously when you hear the name Bill Buckner, the first thing that sports fans, and especially Red Sox fans, think of is the 1986 World Series, in which there's obviously the famous error between the legs. And while obviously I will talk about that for a little bit, but I think that should not be how we define Bill Buckner. I think we should think of Bill Buckner as a pretty solid player. I mean, look at this guy's stats. He has 2,715 hits. I actually looked it up. He has more hits than David Ortiz and Dustin Pedroia. So pretty impressive for Bill Buckner. And also he played for a while. He played between 1969 and 1990. So he played for a while in baseball. So, and he also had a career 289 batting average, which is pretty solid. And if it weren't for knee injuries, he probably would have went down as an all-time great. And also, what we should also remember Bill Buckner is for being a really classy guy, because when that error happened, he always answered the questions, and he wasn't bitter. He wasn't bitter and angry at the fact that everybody was making fun of him. He was classy, and he answered the questions, and of course you could see it visually bothered him, but yeah. Also, we should remember Bill Buckner for being a classy individual as well, and a solid player as well. Unfortunately, that when you hear the name Bill Buckner, that's not what you think of. But okay, let's talk about that play in '86. So I always kind of had a problem with people trashing Bill Buckner for that play. Okay, first of all, I read it somewhere. I think Dan Patrick said this, that apparently the manager, who I don't really feel like saying his name, I actually think I blame him more, because he should not have Bill Buckner out there, because Bill Buckner didn't have great knees, and I believe he wanted him out there just to celebrate. I mean, you don't celebrate until you've won. And then also, one thing that people forget is that Bill Buckner did not blow the game. He cost them a win, but the thing is, the game was already tied. Like, they already blew the lead. Like, the bullpen for the Red Sox already blew the lead. So, and also, I think Bill Buckner, when you look at somebody like Bill Buckner, it helps put sports into perspective, because even though fans like me are very passionate about sports, we jump for joy when our teams win, we cry and we are upset when they lose, but at the end of the day, it's a game just to make people happy. It's just a game. And so when you look at somebody like Steve Bartman, who was basically tortured ever since the whole catching the ball thing in the playoffs. We looked at how Brian Bostic was treated after screwing up that onside kick against the Seahawks for the Packers. So we've seen stuff like that, and so and hopefully when we look back at something like Bill Buckner, it puts into perspective about how we view sports and how we should react to sports. And also I want to say this. I know Boston fans, after how they treated Bill Buckner, got a lot of flack for being horrible. And yes, I'm not going to defend Red Sox fans who sent death threats to him and his family. Like, that's not cool at all. But I guarantee that if you were to put any city who had not won for that long in the same position, the same thing would happen. Because you always got bad apples. Like, when I mentioned Steve Bartman before. When Steve Bartman had that glove incident, like, he got death threats, and then he had to get into the witness protection, and like he's still in hiding. So, and Chicago is yeah, I still think Boston, even though they treated Bill Buckner really badly, like I would say we need to put everything into perspective. And so I would say the way we should remember Bill Buckner is that he was a very solid player and a great person. And that's how we should remember Bill Buckner, not some error. All right, so rest in peace, Bill Buckner. And also, I think it is pretty satisfying that he was able to find closure with with that moment by coming to Fenway Park after they won the second World Series. Honestly, honestly, the fans should have embraced him right away, but it is very satisfying that he was able to find closure before he unfortunately passed away. So, yeah, rest in peace, Bill Buckner, and I hope they remember you in a great way. All right, then, why don't we actually talk about the Red Sox right now? So, the Red Sox, after the Astros series, we're going to continue their stretch of the season so far. That has definitely been the hardest stretch of the season for the Red Sox so far. And so, their first series was against the Cleveland Indians, and in Game 1, the Red Sox beat the Indians pretty bad. They beat them 12-5. Cleveland was up 2-0, and then the Red Sox scored 2 runs, and the Indians scored 1 run in the third inning, and then the Red Sox tied the game in the fourth inning, and then they scored six runs in the fifth inning, and then essentially the game was over. Martinez hit a home run in the sixth inning. Leon hit a home run as well. Mookie Betts had 2 hits. Martinez had 2 hits as well. Bogarts had 2 hits. Who's having a pretty good season so far. Chavis had 2 hits. Jackie Bradley Jr. had 2 hits. So pretty dominant performance by the Red Sox. Porcello won the game for them. So pretty dominant effort by the Red Sox. So and then game 2 was a lot closer. It was a pitching matchup, and so David Price was pitching, and he pitched pretty well. Then the Red Sox, for a while, it was tied at 0-0. Other than the sixth inning, the Red Sox scored 3 runs, and they were leading 3-0. The Cleveland Indians scored 2 runs in the eighth inning, but then the Red Sox scored 2 more runs, and then you would think that would seal the lead. Unfortunately, the bullpen came in and basically blew that by allowing 5 runs in the ninth inning. And so next thing you know, the Red Sox lose 7-5, all because the bullpen completely collapsed. So one of the low points of the season. I know some people said that it was the lowest point of the season. I mean, going down 14-1 is probably still the low point of the season, but this was still a pretty bad low point. So, and then next thing you know, the Red Sox in Game 3 got their butts whipped. They lost 14-9 to the Cleveland Indians, and the pitching was just really, really bad. This was a bullpen game in which the bullpen had to pitch throughout the game, and they basically were pretty terrible. And then next thing you know, the Red Sox played the New York Yankees. And unfortunately, they lost 4-1. Happ for the Yankees played really well, and their bullpen played really well. The Red Sox offense was just flat, and so there's really nothing more to say about that. And then in Game 2, didn't start out great. Porcello pitched, and the Yankees scored 3 runs in the second inning. But then the Red Sox were able to tie it in the fourth inning. But unfortunately, the Red Sox, Rick Porcello allowed a 2-run homer against Gary Sanchez in the fifth inning. And then after that, the Red Sox really couldn't do anything, and the Yankees bullpen was able to basically seal the game, and unfortunately the Red Sox lost Game 2. Game 3, David Price pitched, and obviously you guys know that David Price has not been great in Yankee Stadium, but honestly, he probably pitched better than the other guys, the other pitchers in this Yankee series. So the Red Sox got up 3-0, and then the Yankees scored 2 runs in the fourth inning, and then the Red Sox scored 3 runs and 2 runs in the seventh and eighth inning, and then the bullpen allowed 3 runs in the eighth inning, but the Red Sox were able to keep the lead 8-5, and were able to get their first win of the season against the Yankees. So, a pretty not so great part so far against the three teams that three tough teams. Even though the Indians aren't that great, they're still a tough team. They've been pretty underwhelming as far as the results. There are a few takeaways. One, the offense is, I guess none of the takeaways are that much different from last week. The bullpen is terrible. I mean, they blew some pretty tight games. Against the, especially against the Indians in that game too. The offense is pretty inconsistent. Sometimes they score a lot of runs, and then sometimes they don't. So that's a little frustrating so far. Xander Bogaerts so far is having a pretty good year, and I think Chris Sale, for the most part, is in form compared to where he was at the beginning. So there's definitely some positives, but there's still some negatives, especially that bullpen. That bullpen is terrible. I don't really know. I have no idea how they're gonna. I'm assuming that they're gonna have to add an arm. Stephen Wright's coming back, so that should definitely help. And I believe that I think they just need to add one more arm, and then the bullpen I think will be salvageable, because right now the bullpen is bad. And so next, the Red Sox are playing the Kansas City Royals, who are terrible. So hopefully they can win most of those games, and so they can build some ground against the rest of the teams in their division, because they're still third, and they're still trying to figure things out. All right, then why don't we take a break, and then when we come back, we'll talk a little about the NBA Finals, which is tied as well. All right, then, why don't we talk about the... all right, welcome back, and why don't we talk about the NBA Finals? So, going into the NBA Finals, I picked the Warriors because they're the Warriors, and they've been there before, and they just know how to they have championship experience, unlike the Toronto Raptors. And I think originally I picked in 5, but then I think after Game 1, I switched to Warriors in 6, because after Game 1, I was pretty sure that this was not going to be a 5-game series. So Game 1, the Toronto Raptors pretty much played much better than the Golden State Warriors. Field goal percentage. So the Raptors won 118 to 109. Basically, throughout the first half, they led, and then in the second half, the Warriors, they did fight back, but they just couldn't muster a good enough comeback to win the game. And so you look at the stats. So field goal percentage, Toronto shot 50.6, and then Golden State shot 43.6. Toronto shot 39.4% from 3. Golden State shot 38.7 from 3. Golden State had 17 turnovers. Toronto had 10 rebounds. Golden State had 47, and Toronto had 42. So, and points. Curry had 34 points, but Siakam had 32 points. So Siakam played really well. So pretty good Game 1 win by the Toronto Raptors. And then in Game 2, Toronto mostly played better in the first half, but it was a lot closer. And then in the third quarter, Toronto's offense was really flat. I believe they allowed 18 straight points to the Warriors. It was pretty bad. They couldn't make a shot for like a while. And so after that, the Golden State Warriors were able to seal the victory for Game 2 on the road. And so Thompson had 25 points, led the team. Kawhi Leonard had 34 points, but wasn't enough. And so the Golden State Warriors were able to win Game 2. So yeah, I do think this is a 6-game series. I do think though I'm still sticking with Warriors in 6. I just think that Toronto their offense can have cold streaks, and I think the chemistry and the shooting of the Golden State Warriors will put them ahead of the Raptors, and I believe when Kevin Durant comes back, I think that will definitely help. I'm not really sure when Kevin Durant's coming back. I think I read he's not coming back from Game 3, so that's definitely a problem. But now it's a split, so the Golden State Warriors have a home court advantage. And so I was definitely impressed by the Raptors in Game 1. And I think if Siakam and Leonard and their bench stands up to the challenge, I think they can beat Golden State. But I'm still so far pretty entertaining series. But we'll see what happens in Game 3 because Game 3s are pretty important. Not as important as Game 6s or 7s, but still pretty important. Also, I forgot to mention that from the field in Game 2, Golden State shot 46.3%, Toronto shot 37.2%. From 3, Golden State shot 38.2%, Toronto shot 28.9% from 3. Turnovers, Golden State had 16, Toronto had 15. Rebounds, Toronto had 58, and Golden State had 51 rebounds. So we'll see who wins the championship. And honestly, I don't think Kawhi Leonard should leave after this. I mean, considering the run that they're going on, I don't really see why Kawhi Leonard would want to leave this team. Because this might honestly be the best team he could go to. Better than the Clippers or Lakers or Knicks, which have been rumored for Kawhi Leonard's services. All right, then. Why don't we move on to some quick stories? And so these are stories that I don't really have a ton to say about, but they're pretty big stories of the week, so I figured I might as well mention them. And so, all right then. So recently, an article was posted by ESPN in which they were talking about the dysfunction of the Lakers. So one of the stories is so they mentioned some things that I can't say I was really shocked about. So one thing they mentioned is that Magic is kind of a dictator and is pretty can be pretty aggressive to the employees. I wasn't really shocked by that. I heard that employee needed like therapy or something because Magic was pretty harsh. I heard that he went into the office and told the employees that he had resumes and that he could fire anybody. So I don't really see what the problem with that was. Another story is that apparently Jeannie Buss listens to Linda Rambis and is influenced by Linda Rambis. I mean that'd be a little disturbing if you're a Lakers fan because what has Linda Rambis ever done? And also Rob Pelinka's not very liked, not really well liked in the league, and he's known for being a liar. And an interesting story was kind of pointed out. So I believe a year ago, I think, Rob Pelinka was telling a story with the Rock, and he mentioned a story in which Kobe spoke with Heath Ledger after filming The Dark Knight about how to be focused, because Heath Ledger was able to be focused on being the Joker in The Dark Knight. Here's the problem. Heath Ledger died in January 2008. And guess what? That was 6 months before The Dark Knight was released in theaters. So Kobe would not have been able to see the movie, and would not have been able to meet with Heath Ledger after seeing his performance in the movie. I mean, Also, rest in peace, Heath Ledger. One of the greatest performances of all time. And also, if you guys didn't know, Dark Knight is actually one of my favorite movie of all time. Um, yeah. So this article, I can't say I was really shocked by it. I did have some laughs at how seemingly dysfunctional the Lakers are, and I don't really know how a free agent would want to go there. So yeah, that was interesting. All right, then, in our next story, and this is an interesting one. So, recently, it's been reported that Tom Brady wants to trademark the term Tom Terrific, which is one of Tom Brady's nicknames, probably his most common nickname. However, this is not making Mets fans happy because Tom Seaver, who is a famous pitcher for the Mets, also was nicknamed Tom Terrific. So, Mets fans are not particularly happy with Tom Brady. Probably more than usual because I'm pretty sure Mets fans are either Jets or Giants fans. So, yeah, I honestly don't think I don't like the idea of trademarking terms. It just seems I don't know. It just seems kind of slarmy and kind of dumb. Like I don't know. In general, I don't like trademarking terms. I think Taylor Swift tried to trademark a term. I thought that was dumb. I know the Fine brothers tried to trademark the term react because I don't know. I just think words should not be trademarked. I just think words should just be used by anybody, and trademarking terms. I would make an exception with terms that are just kind of universally used by somebody like Air Jordan. I don't have a problem with Michael Jordan trademarking that. And Tom Terrific, I don't know, it's just such a, like, I don't know if it's a term that we just associate with Tom Brady. And in fact, it doesn't. It's associated with Tom Seaver as well. So, I don't know. I don't think Tom Brady should trademark the term Tom Terrific. And I honestly don't think it's going to go through, but we'll see what happens. So usually I'm in support of what Tom Brady wants to do, but I don't know. I just don't like the idea of trademarking terms in general. And so, and then our last story. So unfortunately, quarterback legend for the Green Bay Packers, Bart Starr, passed away at 85 in Birmingham, Alabama. So yeah, this is pretty sad. So Bart Starr, he played for the Packers his entire career. He played from 1956 to 1971. So I don't know if you guys knew this about Bart Starr. He was a pick. He was the 200th pick, and was picked in the 17th round in the 1956 draft. And I mean, back then they had a lot more rounds than they have today. But yeah. So Bart Starr definitely did quite well for somebody that was a 200th draft pick. And to me, when I think of Bart Starr, I think of a winner. I mean, obviously, when you think of the Packers dynasty, the first person you think of is Vince Lombardi, and usually you think of other players before Bart Starr. You think of Ray Nitschke, you think of Paul Hornung, you think of Jim Taylor, you think of Jerry Kramer and Forrest Gregg. But still, Bart Starr was a big part of those championships because somebody needed to orchestrate the offense when Vince Lombardi was on the sidelines, and Bart Starr was the perfect guy to do it as well. Even though his stats were not the most impressive in the history of pro football, I mean, when you look at an athlete, their job is to win, and besides Joe Montana and Tom Brady, Bart Starr won as much as any quarterback in NFL history. I mean, you look at this guy's resume. He has 2 Super Bowls, 2 Super Bowl MVPs, 5 NFL championships, 4 Pro Bowlers, a first-team All-Pro in 1966, and a Most Valuable Player award in 1966. And he was a 5-time NFL passer rating leader as well. And it was a member of the 1960s All-Decade team. And guess how many playoff games this guy played in? 5. Guess how many he lost? 1, which was his first playoff game against the Eagles. So, I wouldn't exactly say Bart Starr is a top 10 quarterback of all time, but I would definitely say he's a top 20 player of all time. So, rest in peace, Bart Starr. You were in Packers lore, he's definitely up there. I mean, his numbers retired in the Packers Ring of Honor. So, rest in peace, Bart Starr, and may your legacy live on as the NFL continues with its 100th year. All right, then. That's about it, and thank you for listening to the podcast, and hopefully Bruins can win Game 5 and win the Stanley Cup. So, thank you for listening to my sports podcast, and I'm out.